We need to stop talking about change. I know it's exciting. I know it's interesting to find new things constantly. And I know the media with their ever accelerating coverage, the plethora of channels, all the things distracting us every second of the waking day mean that we want to find something new. But ultimately, what I want to talk about today is that actually we need to stop looking for the new and try and sometimes take stock and remind ourselves that a lot of change that we think is happening isn't really, and that there are a number of things that just don't change. We're constantly looking for new needs and ways of fulfilling them, but actually there are no new needs. Human beings have the same bodies, eat the same stuff, fall in love, marry, go to work, die. Our needs fundamentally don't change that much. And actually, in terms of our behaviour, most of our behaviour defaults to not changing, to not trying something new. And whether it's politics, whether it's how we treat our pensions, what we do about our electricity and gas suppliers, or indeed the banks that we stay with. I'm still with the same bank that gave me a T-shirt in the 1980s, and I've never bothered to change, despite, I think, being able to save thousands of pounds over the course of my life by doing so, because I, like everybody else, am subject to the status quo bias, and that is to stick with what you know. And it's a really powerful human emotion, and we sometimes, I think, forget that. So when you're trying out exciting new flavors or changing the formula of your products, you need to watch out, because if Cream, Eggs and Coke know about it, Pepsi Blue knows about it, changing things away from something actually can lead to a consumer backlash, because people like the familiar, the way it's always been. And it's the same in politics. Most American presidents, with an honorable exception or dishonorable exception of Mr. Donald Trump, tend to get 2 terms. And the reason for that is that voters want to give them, once they've started, a chance to finish the job. You don't change horses in midstream, as one of them once put it. And people don't. They tend to nearly always get 2 terms. In Britain, whoever you make as leader of one of the 2 main parties, you can choose somebody as exciting as Mr. Major, someone as calamitous as Mr. Corbyn, but it doesn't matter. Whatever they do, they're almost guaranteed 30% of the vote. I could put a parrot on a stick and paint it red or blue, and at least 3 in 10 people would vote for it as leader of Labour or the Conservatives. I thought that Mr. Corbyn would actually break this rule of no change and the solidity of British politics back in 2017, when he went into an election campaign at only 26% of the vote. But no, blow me down, he got over 40% in that particular election in the end. And even in December 2019, when he was the most unpopular rated leader of the opposition Ipsos Mori's ever measured, next to Mr. Foot's ratings, he still managed to get a lot more than 30% of the vote. So British politics, actually in many countries' politics, changes much more than the newspaper headlines might sometimes have us believe. And indeed, one of the biggest changes in British politics in recent years, the Brexit vote, was actually about not changing. It was about going back to how we used to be before the EU, before 1973, taking back control in the service of returning to normal. So change, even when we're packaging change, sometimes we package it as going back to normal. 57% of the Brexit voters said they were doing it because they wanted Britain to be the way it used to be, without change. And generally, when we're spotting patterns, when we're looking for new things, when we see change happening, very often our perceptions are just simply wrong. We can't see the wood or the forest because we're too busy looking at the trees. So if you take the issue of trust, one of the things that you can find if you go online will be endless articles about how trust is in decline. Americans are less trusting than ever before. Social media companies are losing public trust. Charities are losing trust. The public don't trust politicians. We don't trust the news anymore. We don't trust the British public. Fake doctors are more common than you realise. You name it. British public don't trust the government anymore. But let's look at the data. We've been asking about how much people trust different professions in Britain since the 1980s. And this is the data in terms of how many people trust politicians to tell the truth. As you can see, it's barely changed. All of those headlines, it's always been terrible. People never like politicians. And sometimes our worry about something, what seems to be a new thing, is just a worry about an old thing. And so I think that's really important, because otherwise we tell ourselves stories, which of course is what we do as human beings, but we tell ourselves that the Brexit vote and the Trump vote in America in 2016 were both because people were fed up with the elites. They had lost the trust of the people. Well, let's just go and look at America itself. Let's look at how many people in America trusted the federal government. We've read all those articles about how trust has been in terminal decline. It's changed. And actually, this is the data over a decade. The proportion who trust the federal government at the start, about 1 in 5, and despite Donald Trump's best efforts, or in spite of them, about 1 in 5 trust the federal government at the end. No change there. Most people can be trusted. 3 in 10 Americans trust other people before and after Donald Trump. So, the narrative on trust, about change, about the decline of trust, is completely overblown. It's true that I've been a little bit naughty by only showing you the last decade of data, which looks pretty flat to me, and that if one went back to the 1950s, as I'm showing you on this chart here, you can see that under President Eisenhower, around 7 out of 10 people trusted the American federal government. But I also think that many of us really wouldn't want to be citizens in the 1950s in America. Racial segregation, Jim Crow laws, amazing levels of deference, the threat of nuclear war at any time, a terribly stilted society. Homosexuality was illegal. Is that the sort of country where yes, you trust the government because you can't trust anything else, where you're so worried? So I think actually we need to be careful. Trust has not collapsed anytime soon. There is no recent pattern of a decline in trust that's actually behind the challenges in our politics. Some of them are acute, but they're not new, and we should stop always looking for newness in everything. And so many of us do feel overwhelmed all over the world. We feel that the world is changing too fast. In Britain, we're actually relatively calm. Only 6 out of 10 of us think that the world's changing too fast, compared to 86% in China, or in Mexico, 92%. So actually, we're relatively calm, but still, most people in most countries all over the world say the world's changing too fast. But actually, the evidence is that it might not be changing quite as much as we think. We're also very nostalgic about the past. If you look at this chart, you can see that since the end of the last century, it's grown from 36% to around half of us saying that they want the country to be the way it used to be. And that was, as I said, a particularly strong emotion among the Brexit voters. But of course, let's just cut back a little way. And I think this is one of the things, when we spot a trend like that, it seems to have gone up, go and find some older data from a different question or something else from before. And when I look back, actually, you find suddenly, back in 1994, just as many people as now wanted the country to be the way it used to be. So again, it's about what our attention bias on focusing on recent changes sometimes means that we become blinded to the longer term run of what's actually been happening. Nostalgia is basically the British condition. And generally, people always worry about new inventions. So at the moment, of course, we're worried about privacy. Big Brother really is watching us and can now see everything we do on our phones and everywhere we go. But, every single major technological invention over the last 2,000 years has been met with all sorts of anxieties. So railways in the 1830s, they were apparently going to mean that the human frame would break up if we traveled at more than 30 miles an hour, and it could also cause madness. As bicycles became available in the late 19th century, there were real concerns that they might give women bicycle face, or even worse, that sexual licentiousness would break out as the lower orders got access to free or cheap travel and were able to go around having it away with each other. And even the invention of printing, or indeed before that, literacy, was a major problem for some people. The invention of books was deemed by many monks who were involved in book production before printing, of course, it was going to lead to the complete loss of all memory by human beings, because now everything would be in a book and nobody would need to remember anything. In the same way that, of course, we now worry that kids today don't just think everything's on Google. Well, in the past, people were just worried about the invention of printing. And indeed, back in AD 70, you have Juvenal saying things, the Roman poet saying things like, the problem today is that young people have no respect for their elders, and everybody's writing a book. So generally, new stuff doesn't make us happy, and we particularly worry about new technology of whatever sort. And so while we can see that people's attitudes are gently shifting, this is the proportion of people who say that we're heading for environmental disaster if we don't change things, and we can see that even in the year of the pandemic, more people globally are waking up to the threats of climate change. Nevertheless, when you start to look at people's actual behavior when they're buying something in a shop, what happens? Well, actually, the thing that always happened, is it good value for money? So why did you choose that product? What was most important? You're very worried about the environment. Eco-friendly packaging? Well, yeah, but was it cheaper? Was it good value? And so we need, I think, to be careful about believing that everything is changing. And that everything is going to be new, particularly after the pandemic. It's certainly true that the disease has forced a lot of change on us. Our lives have changed. I mean, look at this. We're talking remotely now. And conferences, business conferences, may never be the same again. Business travel may become a real excitement rather than a horrible torture, as it is sometimes, because we won't be doing it anywhere near as much. And so we can see massive changes in retail. We've seen this more growth in e-commerce in the last 6 months than in the previous 6 years. The same in e-banking. And those changes, I think, are likely to stick. But it's not new. We were already banking online. We were already using the internet. We were already watching streaming movies. We've just done more of it because of the pandemic. Travel. We're traveling much, much less. 81.6% decline in scheduled flights in Britain in January of 2021. A massive, massive decline. But at the same time, we know that once we're allowed to travel, more people than ever all over the world will want to go and get on a plane and go somewhere. It's not a permanent change. It's not a change in our values. And even in the movement of population, we can see up to 1 million people may have left Britain during the pandemic as the catering, hospitality, retail sectors all just shut. Many of the young people working in those industries from elsewhere in the EU or elsewhere in the world would have left. But ultimately, those things, many of them will reopen. Retail will be different. There will be less of it, but there will, things will happen. And Europe, London is still the biggest city in Europe and one of the most diverse. It will still be attractive to people afterwards. So I think we need to be careful. We can see massive changes like that, and we therefore assume that absolutely everything has changed. And we're wired as human beings to look for patterns. That's changed, so everything's changed. But actually, is it? So if you go online, you can find a whole load of hot takes about the world of work may change forever. It really has changed the world forever. It's a born-again world. We'll come out of lockdown and everything will be different. How we exercise is different now. The pandemic changed everything. It's changed our perceptions of time, people. The very time is changing. You're now thinking this is a really short presentation. It really will change everything. The world of work has changed. Youth activism has changed. Staff development has changed. You can find endless hot takes, but I'm not so sure. Underneath it all, apart from our changed behaviours, our values haven't changed, and they change much more slowly. And we're not talking here about sort of just lightweight opinions about things you haven't thought about, but about those things about how you should live your life. Is the death penalty right? And those sorts of things, even with a massive shock like COVID-19, those sorts of things change much more slowly. So, you have to remember that in research, we're measuring opinions, and those are often like froth, not particularly considered. The surface of the sea, it bounces around. What did you think of that song last night? What did you think of the Bake Off finals? These are fairly shallow views. Attitudes are a bit deeper. We can measure those as well. Perhaps, how do you feel about the government of the day? But our values, what do you think about the death penalty? What do you think about gay marriage? Should people have children? Those things change much, much more slowly, and it will take much more than a year of a pandemic to change those. And many of the things that we can see when we zoom out of them are often changes that were already underway. So I think our values are deeper held, views of how things ought to be, the natural order that we all have, often, and they're very durable. You can take a community of migrants, and go and look at some of our migrant communities in Britain, often coming from completely different agricultural communities, now living in highly urban communities in a completely different part of the world. And yet their values are those of their parents or grandparents. They haven't changed in many cases. They're hanging on to those things because they give them meaning. Now, some of these values are more important than others. They're more salient. They do change over time, but not that quickly. And I think sometimes our focus on endless change, the jogging up and down of opinion, is distracting us from what's really going on. So if you look at Britain, I think what's interesting is that, we looked at some data recently. We went back to the last century and we said, okay, well, let's look back to before the internet. What did people feel then about a number of things? So there's the number of people online in Britain. It's gone from 13% in 1999, now at 93%. There's the proportion of people who fear that technical progress is destroying our lives. Didn't really change. There's the proportion of people who said they felt overwhelmed by all this stuff, all these screens. Well, it wasn't like that in 1999. It is today. Same proportion want to slow down their lives. Being a boss, the chief executive of Ipsos Mori will make you happy. Well, probably for most people it didn't in 1999. It certainly wouldn't in 2019. Or indeed that we just need to rely on our own principles and nobody else. hasn't really changed. And then I thought, well, maybe the pandemic did change everything. Maybe we saw some fundamental reappraisal of all of those things. So we looked again, and more people were online, forced to go there to get their shopping. But actually on everything else, no statistically significant difference. And that's because our values change and some of our underlying feelings change much, much more slowly. Concern about data privacy, I found recently, was identical in 1992 across Europe as it is today, despite Facebook, the internet, and everything, which didn't exist in 1992 in any meaningful sense. So we need to be careful about just spotting changes or things all the time and thinking this must be a new phenomenon. People are worried about data privacy because I read about it in the news. No, they always are. So what that means, I think, is that COVID-19 has revealed some things to us that were already there, the social inequalities, and sometimes it's sharpened them. It's revealed the need that we actually do need our ability to make some things ourselves in this country, the need for resilience. It's reminded us all over the world of the importance of the local and those around us. It's accelerated existing trends, but not created new ones. So it's certainly accelerated life online. It's certainly accelerated the decline of the high street. We lost 200,000 jobs, roughly, in commerce, in retail last year. We will lose exactly, maybe more, in 2021. The high street is changing, and many people won't go back to shopping offline for basic stuff. But at the same time, that trend had already begun long before COVID. Nostalgia is there, certainly, but again, as I think I might have shown you, that uncertainty and about the future and nostalgia for the past was there long before COVID-19. Trust in science was already there and had actually been rising since the beginning of the century. And if anything, the creation of the vaccines in a few short months that now promise us freedom means that, it's perhaps unsurprisingly that it's accelerated again. And brands with purpose, long before the pandemic, we wanted brands that reflected our values. We wanted chief executives to stand up and be counted. And yes, COVID-19 has made us think harder about that and perhaps reflect on how things are and what might change. But really, things aren't changing as much as we sometimes think they are. So it's true that eventually enforced behavior changes will affect us, sometimes in ways we don't even notice. If you take online shopping for clothes, it turns out that it's quite hard to buy suits online because you can't try them on. So formal clothes don't do as well, and we're not in offices most of the time. People want stretchy stuff that they can visualize better. The quality of the fabric matters less, and bright colors, which you see on screen, seem to matter more. So maybe we'll see fashion taking a shift as a result of that, but it won't necessarily happen overnight. And I think overall what I'd say is that, first of all, our behavior has changed, but our values haven't. Our constant focus on the new and the looking for patterns of change is sometimes obliviating us to these longer-term trends. COVID-19 has not changed everything. It has not changed our values, as I hope I've demonstrated, but it has changed our behavior. And the change that we are seeing, where it is taking place, is stuff that's not new, but has simply been pushed faster by COVID-19. It's revealed those trends and accelerated them, but they're not new trends. They were already there. They were, I'm afraid, for those of you who really like newness. And one of the problems is that we're often spotting change that just simply isn't there at all. We see a pattern of events, and we then tell ourselves a story about why it's happened. We voted for Brexit and Trump because we were fed up with the elites. We wanted to take back control, blah, blah. We'd lost trust in them. But actually, both of those events were pretty close-run things. And the preconditions were there long before, and the preconditions for those will be there long afterwards. So we often spot change. It's the same with the decline in trust. It has declined, but it declined mostly over a decade ago. And finally, I'll just say overall then, when you're thinking about the world, change, I think, probably is overrated. And if you focus on understanding human values, which in research we should be able to do, if you focus on human values, you will finally really understand people. And it's when they change, which is much slower, that we might avoid our complete obsession with new. Thank you very much.